From the banks of the Colorado River in Lake Mead to the homes and businesses in Southern Nevada, welcome to Water Smarts, the podcast pumping from the heart of Las Vegas, where we engage with the experts who keep the water flowing throughout Southern Nevada. I'm Bronson Mack.
And I'm Zuelke. From how we treat it, deliver it, use it, protect it, and conserve it, the Water Smarts podcast is all about water in Southern Nevada. We hope to make you a little smarter about the one thing that keeps us all connected: water.
Hey, Crystal, how are you today?
I'm good, Bronson. Ready to dive into our topic today, which is about trees. Made me think about some of my favorite childhood books, The Lorax and The Giving Tree.
Oh, love those books.
Aren't they amazing?
Absolutely. Read them to my kids every night.
I speak for the trees.
Yeah, right?
Our two guests today, I'm looking at them and thinking about, this conversation today, that they are here to speak for the trees.
They are here to speak for the trees. That is absolutely right. And you think about how much those trees give us here in Southern Nevada, that shade. They give us habitat for wildlife. And Southern Nevada, actually, for an urban area, we have some of the thinnest tree canopy of any urban area in the United States. And as we look at a future that is going to be warmer, that is going to be drier, trees are going to be key to our future here. That shade that those trees provide, that's helping to combat the urban heat island effect. And like I said, providing that habitat for wildlife. We just really can't have enough trees here. And some of those trees aren't going to survive over the next 20 to 30 years as it gets a little bit hotter, as it gets a whole lot warmer, and certainly as it gets drier. So here with us today are two experts from Star Nursery, Paul No, best known as Dr. Q, and Joey Lynn Watt. Dr. Q is a certified horticulturist and Joey Lynn is a certified arborist, and both have years of horticulture experience. Dr. Q and Joey Lynn, welcome back to the Water Smarts podcast.
It's good to see you again.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here again.
Well, we are really happy to have you back on the Water Smarts podcast. Star Nursery has been an outstanding partner, not only with the Southern Nevada Water Authority when it comes to water conservation, but also educating the landscape community, as well as those who are doing their own landscaping. So we appreciate you sharing your expertise with our listeners here today. Dr. Q, before we talk about the steps that people should take to protect those mature, established trees as they remove and upgrade their grass landscapes and their sprinkler systems to water-smart trees and plants, can you just explain a little bit about why landscape changes can stress our established trees?
Well, certainly, especially since what we're working with is basically their root system, because removing the turf is going to involve getting into the ground and interacting with the root system of the plant. So it's important to understand the root system of the tree in order to protect it. Roots do a couple of different functions that are very important. That is that they do absorb minerals and water from the soil. They transport that throughout the tree's stems over the complete tree to supply nutrients for producing foliage. And also they anchor the tree to the ground so that it's less likely to blow over or tip over from heavy winds that we have here. The root system does consist of large perennial roots, which are like underground stems of the tree. They usually grow horizontally from the base of the tree, and they're normally under 6 to 24 inches of soil. The smaller absorbing roots are sometimes known as feeder roots. They're the ones that do the actual absorbing of the soil solution. They are much, much smaller, are usually only about a 1/16 of an inch in diameter, and they constitute the major surface area of absorbing materials that are picking up the water and the minerals from the soil. And they tend to be near the soil surface because it's easier for them to pick up more water, more nutrients or minerals, and more oxygen. And they can get that closer to the surface. So that's why those roots are a lot of times more tangled or mixed in with the roots of the grass and the shrubs that are growing around the tree as well. About half of the root system extends out and beyond the actual drip line of the tree or the outer canopy of the tree. So that's very important to realize as well.
Paul, you bring up some great points and is kind of establishing for us how important the root system is for trees. And we're going to talk about watering trees and the best efficient way to keep them alive and healthy during these transitions a little bit later on in the podcast. But Joey Lynn, because the smaller roots are closer to the surface, as Paul mentioned, they may tangle with your grass and your shrubs or other plants. How does this impact the tree when you take out the grass and maybe some of the older shrubs that you want to replace?
Well, there's several things that impact the quality of the tree when we take out that lawn. Sprinklers deliver a large amount of water very quickly. Trees and shrubs are just like us in that they're habit forming. They get in a habit of receiving that kind of water in very, very short spurts very quickly. So a lot of the fine cedar roots just sit right on the surface so that they can take advantage of all the water that is distributed to them. So when we pull that back, the tree no longer has those small feeder roots to take up the amount of water that they are used to getting. But the lawn also acts as a buffer to our extreme temperatures. The other thing that people don't realize is when you have a lawn, you fertilize more frequently. So those trees get fertilization possibly 2 times a year, if not more. So without that regular fertilization, those trees will struggle as well. All these things and these changes, that's the key, is that we're making changes to the well-established root systems of the trees, and that is going to really stress out the tree.
So an established tree has roots that are used to getting a lot of water from sprinkler systems. And if they're desert-adapted trees, they don't really need that much water or don't need the water delivered at least in short spurts like they get when sprinklers are turned on. These roots are mixing in with the grass, and that makes them vulnerable to damage when you dig up the grass. Dr. Q, how do you approach a landscape upgrade so you can protect that beautiful shade tree in your yard? Can all the trees be saved?
No, some trees can't be saved because they are not going to be able to withstand the less frequent watering, or it's going to take a long time for them to adjust to that and may not look good for quite a while after the conversion. First steps is to actually do an evaluation of the tree's health by seeing if it can survive the environmental change of what's going to happen. May be in a state of decline already, especially with our changing environment. So maybe it's not worth saving. There are a lot of great drought-tolerant trees that are good for our area and better for the less water that they're going to be given. The thing is that there's a lot of landscapes that are established right now that have trees that are high water use trees. And those trees have survived in the past, which are not going to do as well once that irrigation is reduced. If you want to keep the tree, it should be one that you're happy with, that can survive the drip system rather than the sprinkler system, and that it's healthy enough to where it's going to survive much better.
Let's just walk this through. So now we've moved forward. You're working with your landscaper and you're going to install a drip system now. You're eliminating that spray irrigation system and that grass, and you're moving to the drip system. Joey Lynn, what should people pay attention to when they are installing those drip systems for those trees and those existing plants or those new plants that they have purchased and are installing?
First, you're going to identify and look for the roots of the trees or shrubs, either one. That is where your main focus is going to be. You're going to do what you can to first protect them, even possibly avoiding any real heavy work in those big areas. We call it the critical roots zone. So each tree or shrub, whether they're large or small, has a critical root zone. And that's where your main focus is going to be, to preserve that the best that you can. Then you're going to want to think about where you're going to place the drip irrigation. Drip irrigation must happen where the fine feeder roots are. So visual evaluation of where the roots are is going to be very, very important. You place your irrigation within the drip line. So a drip line is that area if you were to throw a tarp over the canopy of the tree and it rain and it be like an umbrella ring where there's water, you can guarantee that there are fine feeder roots within halfway from the trunk to where that little line has been created and up to 3 times outside of that area if it's a very, very mature tree. So placing drip emitters so that when you turn on your drip irrigation, you see a wetting pattern that spreads and covers that area. If you have dry spots where there are roots, we need to get irrigation into that area. Roots, especially fine feeder roots, can continue to grow in moist soil. The minute that that soil becomes dry and does not receive any more water, those fine feeder roots will die. And then the plant has to work really, really hard to create new fine feeder roots, to have absorption, to take nutrients and water back up to the canopy. So what we're doing is we're trying to avoid those moments of stress on the tree. So the minute that you can establish where your roots are and your fine feeder roots, whether it's a very large mature tree or a shrub, they will have a better chance at survival. The other thing is to prepare the trees and shrubs. Going into this, establish some deep water several times a week prior to the removal of the lawn. That is going to help the tree because like we said before, these trees and shrubs are going to take advantage of as much water as they can get in that time. So if you supply the water, the trees will take it up and hold on to it. And then thirdly, choose the proper time of year to do this. We do not want to start a project like this in the end of June and going into July when the trees are going to be at their most stressful time. Choose a cooler time of year. We say early spring, early fall. So take your time, plan it well, and wait until the temperatures are going to be cooler.
So it's really being strategic about your timing of doing this, the time of year. Can we do it in the fall, if not the spring?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can do it in fall. Fall is a great season. The key is to know your environment, know the quality of your landscape plants and material, and make the appropriate decision so that the goal is to have longevity. We want our trees and shrubs for a very, very long time.
Yeah, so making sure that the drip irrigation is getting to that tree so that it can get through the transition here. Turning now to grass, as part of the Water Smart Landscapes rebate, your grass has to be alive when the SNWA comes out to verify that your landscape meets the program conditions. But once approved and the conversion project begins, a lot of people turn off the water and they let the grass die. Dr. Q, are there other ways to kill off your grass that might work better during a landscape upgrade project?
Yeah, turning off the water completely actually is going to do more damage to the roots of the tree and your shrubs than to use other methods such as herbicides or dethatchers. Herbicides can be used. Glyphosate is one of the better ones that will kill that grass off without doing a lot of damage to the lower roots. Dethatchers are good because that's a vertical blade cutter that will actually shred up the grass and the shallow thatch that's right underneath the grass, and it chops it up so that it's more easily raked out of the soil without doing any deep damage to the roots. Those are much better to use than like a tractor or heavier equipment because the heavier equipment can damage the tree roots by crushing them, could break branches off of trees, could wound the bark tissue. It's much safer to use the herbicides and dethatchers. If you do use a sod cutter or more heavier equipment, or your landscapers do, then you do want to protect the tree by putting up a protective barrier around the tree. And that barrier should be out around the drip line of the tree so that it protects that root area under the canopy and close to the trunk so that those don't get damaged by any of that heavier equipment. Another thing that it does is it minimizes the soil compaction because heavy equipment, tractors and things are going to add to the compaction, which will then restrict the water and oxygen uptake of the roots. So that's never good. It actually impedes the soil drainage as well with the compaction. So the heavy equipment should be used as little as possible.
Joey Lynn, would you just give our listeners a little bit more information when it comes to installing that drip system? You talked a little bit about making sure that you're installing appropriately along that root zone, but what other tips would you have for folks with regards to installing their drips?
So the most important thing I think that we establish is trees need to be watered for longer than a small shrub. So if you have your outer perimeter of shrubs that are on an existing drip irrigation system, then leave the valve that was for the lawn and convert it and designate that to a tree valve. Then you can schedule your trees separately from your shrubs. The other thing, again, is that the emitters that are placed on a new tree during this landscape upgrade is not the same amount of water that you're going to need when that tree becomes a mature tree 5 years down the road. So you can add just a few emitters, about 4 emitters, so that you're moistening the root zone every time you water, so that the soil around that newly planted tree or shrub is moistened so that the roots are encouraged to grow into that moist soil. And then as that plant or tree matures, you can always add more.
I think that is a great tip, adding those drip emitters to your trees or plants as needed, having your trees on a separate cycle than your plants so that you can water those to different types of plant species accordingly, because you want to make sure that those trees are getting enough water. But I especially like that adding emitter component, because the reality is I think most of us would increase our run time. We would just add more time to the amount that our irrigation system is running. Therefore, we're increasing water use for the total property. Whereas if we just add the drip emitters themselves to those trees or to a plant that seems stressed and might need some more water, you're still able to water for the same amount of time, but you will be adding more emitters to it, therefore applying that additional water in a more efficient way.
So all of this is really great advice for somebody that's transitioning from using a traditional sprinkler system to drip irrigation. Joey Lynn, what else do we need to know about protecting our established trees?
Be aware of the materials being used by your landscaper. These materials being used are what are called weed barriers. They could also be referred to as a ground cover. In landscape, a ground cover really should be referred to as a weed barrier. And the reason that they put down a weed barrier is because the lawn is being pulled up. There are many different lawns that do grow here in Las Vegas. There's Bermuda lawn that comes back every year, and they have what we like to call a very aggressive mother plant. A fescue lawn we overseed multiple times a year, and they're a very fragile lawn. They're easily removed by dethatching or by a non-selective herbicide. When we have an established Bermuda lawn, it is very commonplace for a landscape fabric or a weed fabric to go down. Do not ever put down any plastic covering. That is going to heat up. It's going to cause the roots to sweat. Moisture does not drain, and it's just very dangerous. It's like a solar blanket being put on the root system of the tree. So just avoid anything that is of plastic sheeting. The landscape fabrics are a geotextile weed barrier that does allow for oxygen. It is permeable. Water does drain. The only negative is they do degrade over time. That does not mean that you will not get weeds. We always recommend that you use a pre-emergent twice a year because weeds blow in, sit on top, and they will germinate. So a weed fabric is just to help prevent the weeds from coming up from the old lawn that was there before.
Just to expand on the ground cover that's used, we oftentimes see people pile up mulch or ground cover material all the way to, up against the stems of the trunks or trees or shrubs and put it very deep to help prevent weeds from growing. Sometimes that's not good. In fact, it's really best that you keep the mulch at a depth of 2 to 4 inches. You're going to be much, much better off. And that you want to not pile it right up against the bark tissue of the trees or shrubs. It can cause stress, especially in the heat, to the stem tissue. May lead to insect and disease problems as well. So we recommend to keep that layer at a 2 to 4 inch and also to taper it away from the base of the trees or plants to ensure a healthier landscape.
One of the things, Dr. Q, that you had talked about a little bit earlier is that some trees aren't going to make it, unfortunately. And that is partly because, believe it or not, Las Vegas, Southern Nevada is going to get hotter in the coming years. It's just a fact with our climate change. Because of that, trees that used to do well here in our climate may not do well in the future. Can you give us some examples of trees that might not survive the local climate change and then suggest what you think would be better in our hotter, drier climate?
As far as trees are concerned, you want to probably stay away from things that even are showing problems now, such as flowering plums, pine trees even, that people have used here for many, many, many years. They use a lot of water. They need deep irrigation. They're going to start to decline. European sycamores, which the only healthy ones in town that I normally see, are actually planted in lawn areas because they get so much water. There are going to be trees like that don't make it. In general, any larger leafed trees are going to use more water and are going to be less likely to handle our increasing temperatures and our less amounts of water that we irrigate with. So you're better off using trees that have smaller leaves, good drought-tolerant trees like acacia varieties, like Acacia smallii or mulga acacia, desert willows, some of the smaller growing mesquites, like the honey mesquite is a great tree, I think, for here. Doesn't take a lot of water. Some of the smaller growing Palo Verde trees. There are things that are here now, such as the fruitless olives, I think are going to be attainable to use for several more years. Things like Texas mountain laurel, the chase tree or vitex, the smaller growing oaks. They're going to be slower growing, but they will hold up in our drier climate very well, and they do make good shade trees as well. So there are a lot of good selections that can be used here.
So Joey Lynn, are there any resources that you recommend our listeners might be able to leverage in order to find the right trees or the right plants for their yards that do well here in the Mojave Desert?
Yes, the Water Authority's website is really one of our favorite go-tos. SNWA.com is really a great tool. There's the plant search tool, which is extremely helpful. We love referring people there. We have a plant library on ours as well. Ours are the most readily available trees that we sell, and some great descriptions. All of them give really, really great descriptions of the trees and the expectation of the water usage as well. The University Cooperative Extension is a great resource. Springs Preserve does an amazing job of getting the information out there to homeowners. And our staff, we really have worked really hard to educate our staff so that they can be a resource to the public and give that quality advice.
And the cool thing about all of this, a lot of this is free. These are free resources that residents can take advantage of, when they're going through this process.
Dr. Q and Joey Lynn, sometimes we get questions from our listeners, and today we have a question from our listener, Lisa. And Lisa wants to know why her tangerine tree looks great, but the fruit just doesn't have juice, and it looks like maybe it's got some freezer burn to it. Can you speak to that a little bit and maybe help Lisa understand what she might need to be doing with her tangerine?
Citrus are very, very susceptible to inconsistent irrigation. So that's the number one thing, is having a irrigation system where we're not overwatering a citrus and we're not letting it freeze in the winter. The other thing is fertilizing citrus at the proper time is the most important. And we want to do that before bud development, actually. So fertilizing with a great organic fertilizer that's balanced is going to be the key. Getting that fertilization done prior to the buds actually being on the plant will give a better chance to produce a better fruit. Pruning is really, really important. We want to do enough pruning that we open up the center of the citrus so that sunlight and oxygen get down in there, but we don't want to over prune where we're removing any leaf protections as well. Also, wait until after our last possible date of frost for pruning.
The watering issue is very important, as Joey Lynn stated. You need to make sure that you're watering at the appropriate times of fruit development. If you water too heavily when the trees are in flower or in the very young fruit stage, the extra water will actually cause them to drop the flowers and the fruit so that you don't get as much fruit production. You're better off to back off on the watering a bit and wait until that fruit develops to a ping pong ball size or a large marble size. And at that point, you can then start increasing the watering again to normal watering, because in the development of the fruit, once it's at that stage and ripening, it does need more water to make it more juicy and the fruit better. And just wanted to remind everybody, too, is that if you do have problems on any of your plants or trees, you can bring in photos or samples to any of our stores and show any of our personnel in our sales department what those problems are, and they'd be happy to help trying to identify those and recommendations of how to correct them.
Great advice. And for those who are listening to this podcast this spring, just a reminder that Joey Lynn and Dr. Q are giving a free class about how to protect your trees during a landscape conversion at the Springs Preserve on April 15th as part of the Meet the Experts event. You can get more information at the Springs Preserve website, springspreserve.org. Dr. Q and Joey Lynn, thank you so much for joining us here today on the Water Smarts Podcast.
Our pleasure, and thank you.
Thank you for having us. This was fun. We appreciate it.
Well, Crystal, another great conversation, focusing here on trees, and gosh, they are so important for our environment, aren't they?
Yeah, it's so important to understand that trees and plants are so different from our grass landscapes that a lot of us have had for many years just due to, before we were in a drought and grass was everywhere. So I learned some good things today from them just about how, a landscape, we have to look at it as it changes. And so we've got to prepare our irrigation systems to change with the landscape. And then also, I'm just going to say, I feel validated that they said we need to prune our citrus trees. And that's because we have a lemon tree in our backyard and my husband's been letting it go and it's getting taller and taller. And I keep telling him he needs to go out and trim it. And he's been pushing back on me. And now I can give him some evidence here and say, see, I know what I'm talking about sometimes.
How's that lemon tree produce? You getting a lot of fruit?
It is, but I'll say a lot of it's at the lower end. And because I think the growth up top, it's getting too tall and I think it needs to be trimmed back. So pruned back.
Yeah, well, after we heard the response with regards to the tangerine tree, and we're just having a little bit of wrap-up conversation there with Dr. Q and Joey Lynn. Dr. Q indicated that tangerines are some of the hardest citrus trees to maintain here in this desert environment. And he did say that lemons do quite well here. He also said limes, oranges, and grapefruits. So if you are considering a fruit tree, perhaps lemons, limes, oranges, or grapefruits would be a good choice for you. Of course, you can get more inspiration and more support and expertise from the folks over there at Star Nursery. They have plenty of locations around town. I think one other thing that's kind of interesting, Crystal, that we talked about is the fact that some of these existing trees within our community are not going to survive over the next 20 to 30 years. As our climate gets warmer, as Las Vegas gets hotter, as it gets drier, we have an abundance of pine trees right now. A lot of them are very, very mature. Some of them are just reaching the end of their life cycle as as it is, but as it gets warmer and drier, trees like pine trees are not going to be long for this community. So, it probably is a larger conversation that we need to begin having with the community about succession planning for those trees and replacing those trees, obviously not all at once, but replacing those trees over time with more desert-adapted trees, many of which Dr. Q referenced. I think that was all good input, and I think we got some more conversation we need to have about trees, right?
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to continue talking about this because as we move forward as a community, removing and replacing grass with more desert-friendly plants and landscapes, trees are going to be a big topic for us because we want them. We need them. They're important to us, especially in a hot climate like we have here in Southern Nevada. And so planning for the future and putting the right trees in place is going to benefit everybody.
Shade. That is what it's going to be all about in the future here in the Mojave Desert. Well, that's it for this episode here on the Water Smarts Podcast. We hope that you'll subscribe and listen next time. And if you have a question, just like Lisa did, send us an email. You can find us at watersmarts@snwa.com, or you can just go to our website, snwa.com, and reach us through our contact page. We'll get back to you with an answer and maybe even have your question on a future episode. We'll see you here next time on Water Smarts.